Hello and welcome to Mutt's American Crime, where we will be uncovering the dusty corners of history. Again, welcome to Mutt's American Crime. I'm your host, Mutt, and tonight we're digging into a character so colorful and slippery, so downright dirty, if you will, that he practically defined the word Wild West outlaw. Forget your Jesse Jameses and your Billy the Kids. At least for a moment, because today we're talking about Dirty Dave Rudabaugh. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, Dirty Dave Rudabaugh, who actually did ride, according to the Wild West extravaganza with Billy the Kid. I did get quite a bit of information from the Wild West extravaganza with Josh. You can find that on YouTube, by the way. Now, before we dive head first into the chaotic life and even more chaotic death of Dave Rudabaugh, let's set the stage, shall we? We're talking late 1870s, early 1880s. The American West is still very much wild. Railroads are pushing through towns, are springing up like dandelions, and with them an equal measure of lawmen, settlers, and, well, the kind of folks who prefer to take what they want rather than earn it. Dave Rudabaugh was firmly in that latter camp. Excuse me. Born around 1854 in Illinois, his early life is a bit murky, uh, as is often the case with these frontier figures. What we do know is that by his early 20s, he'd already earned the moniker Dirty Dave. Why, you ask? Well, it's said that he fought dirty. He would gun down anybody who looked at him crossways. He was actually rather, from what I've read about him, he was actually very well read, a very well bred individual. But again, the moniker goes with the person that he's supposed to be betraying. It wasn't because he was a slob, though. Though he probably was, it was because he was known for being a ruthless, untrustworthy, and utterly unpredictable individual. Think of a rattlesnake in human form, but with a six shooter and a penchant for robbery. His criminal career truly kicked off in earnest in the late 1870s. One of his first significant ventures was with a gang known as the Jackass Gang. That's right, I said the Jackass Gang in Kansas. Not the most intimidating name, I'll grant you. But don't let that fool you. This crew was involved in stagecoach robbery, train robbery, and Rudabaugh quickly established himself as a prominent and often violent member. One of the most infamous exploits was the robbery of a Santa Fe Railroad train near Kinsley, Kansas. in 1878. It was audacious, to say the least. It was brutal, and it put Dave Rudabaugh firmly on the radar of law enforcement across several territories. He wasn't just taking money, he was making a statement, albeit one written in lead and fear. The Jackass Gang eventually splintered, as most outlaw gangs do when the heat gets just a little too intense. But Rudabaugh, ever the survivor, simply moved on to newer pastures and new partners. He drifted south, finding himself in Texas, where he quickly fell in with another notorious group, the Dodge City Gang. This wasn't a gang of bank robbers per se, but rather a collection of gamblers, saloon owners, and general ne'er-do-wells who often bent, if not outright broke the law, to their will. This period saw Rudabaugh continue his criminal ways, often involved, in small-scale robberies, cattle rustling, and generally making a nuisance of himself, if you will. He was a man always looking for the next score, never settling down, and always with a watchful eye for anyone who might stand in his way. But Rudabaugh's path was about to intersect with some of the biggest names in the Wild West history. In 1880, he found himself in Las Vegas, New Mexico. Excuse me. Not the glittering gambling mecca we know of today, but a dusty, bedraggled frontier town. And it was here that he ran into some old acquaintances, namely Doc Holliday and a certain Bat Masterson, who was serving as a lawman at the time. Masterson actually arrested Rudabaugh for stagecoach robbery. Now, imagine that. Two legends of the West, one on each side of the law, clashing in a New Mexico saloon. It's stuff of legends. Rudabaugh, even the escape artist, managed to break out of jail, solidifying his reputation as a man who simply could not be held. But it was his association with Billy the Kid that truly cemented his place in Wild West lore. After his escape, Rudabaugh joined up with Billy and his gang, often referred to as the Regulators, though by this point they were more outlaw than lawmen. They were a force to be reckoned with, riding hard, robbing, and often clashing violently with anyone who dared to cross them. They were a tight knit, albeit dangerous crew. They shared a common enemy in Pat Garrett, the the legendary sheriff, of Lincoln County, New Mexico. Garrett had made it his personal mission to bring Billy the Kid in and his gang to justice, and that meant bringing down Dave Rudabaugh as well. Hmm. The spring of 1881 saw a dramatic turn of events. Pat Garrett and his posse were relentlessly pursuing Billy the Kid and his gang. In April, Garrett cornered them in a stone house in Stinking Springs, New Mexico. Could you imagine dying in a place called Stinking Springs? After a tense standoff, Billy the Kid, Dave Rudabaugh, and the rest of the gang surrendered. From what I understand, there was also food being served, and that was why they were actually very, very hungry. And from what I understand, they surrendered in order to get to the food. Just as a side note, this was a huge victory for Garrett, the most wanted man in the territory, and his notorious right hand man were finally in custody. Rudabaugh, along with Billy, was sentenced to death for various crimes. But if you've been paying attention, you know that Dirty Dave wasn't one to simply accept his fate. That's the truth. While awaiting execution in Las Vegas, New Mexico, Rudabaugh, even ever resourceful, found a way to escape. Once again, this time he and his fellow inmate managed to overpower a guard, steal a weapon, and blast their way out of the jail. It was a daring escape, and once again, Dirty Dave was a free man, albeit a very wanted one. But his freedom was short lived. Pat Garrett, now more determined than ever to recapture Rudabaugh just a few months later, this time Garrett made sure the jail was more secure. Now, as I understand it from the Wild West extravaganza, at the time that Rudabaugh and Billy the Kid were first arrested by Garrett, they had a prison pit and not an actual prison or a jail pit where they held Rudabaugh and Billy the Kid. Later, the jail itself was built, and I believe that that's what they're referring to here. Garrett made sure that all the jail was more secure. Okay. And Rudabaugh was held until he could be transferred to a more formidable prison in Santa Fe. Dave Rudabaugh was a survivor, a man who seemed to defy the odds time and time again. But even the slipperiest of outlaws eventually runs out of luck. After serving some time in Santa Fe, Rudabaugh was transferred to the state penitentiary in Columbus, Texas in 1882. While there, he once again attempted to escape, but this time was unsuccessful. His luck was truly starting to run out. After several years in prison, Rudabaugh was eventually pardoned in 1886. Imagine that, Dirty Dave, out of prison, free to roam. You'd think he'd learn his lesson, wouldn't you? That he'd try to live a quiet life, but no. Perhaps settling down, raise a family, raise a few chickens, but this was Dave Rudabaugh. I mean, come on. Um, Old habits do, in fact, die hard, and Rudabaugh was no exception to that. Um, After his release, Rudabaugh made his way south, eventually crossing the border into Old Mexico. He continued his life of crime, engaging in cattle rustling and petty banditry, but he wasn't in the American West anymore. The rules were different, and the local authorities were not to be trifled with. On February 18th, 1886, Dave Rudabaugh met his end in Para, Chihuahua, Mexico. He was involved in a dispute with a local owner, which escalated into a gunfight. Rudabaugh, known for his quick temper and even quicker draw, pulled his pistol, but this time he was outmatched. The saloon owner and some of his cohorts returned fire. Rudabaugh was shot multiple times. He fell fatally wounded. But the story of Dave Rudabaugh's death doesn't end there. In a gruesome act that speaks volumes about the rough and tumble nature of the time and perhaps the sheer hatred people had for him, his head was cut off and displayed on a pole in the town square, a grim trophy, a warning to all all outlaws, and the definitive end to the life of the Wild West's most notorious figures. So there you have it, folks. The tale of Dirty Dave Rudabaugh, a man started as a petty thief, evolved into a hardened outlaw, rode with some of the biggest names in the Wild West history, and met a truly gruesome end. He was a symbol of the lawless frontier, a man who lived by the gun and died by it. What can we learn from Dave Rudabaugh? What can we learn from Dave Rudabaugh's story? Perhaps that even the most cunning and resilient criminals eventually face their reckoning, or perhaps that the Wild West truly earned its name, and men like Dave Rudabaugh were an inevitability of that chaotic era. One may never know. One thing is for certain: Dirty Dave Rudabaugh left an indelible mark on the history of American crime, a stain that still fascinates us today. Hmm. Thank you for joining me on Mutt's American Crime podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review. And join us next time as we delve into another dark corner of American history and American crime.